There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. And it is bloody cold out there. It's minus 30 Celsius at 11 a.m., so it's not going to warm up very much for the rest of the day either. I have a fabulous biblio adventure coming up later today, and my mom and I are determined to show up regardless of the weather. I'll tell you more about that next Friday. And other than that, I did have a lovely chat with Kenji yesterday, and the update on his mother is they had the doctors unplug the feeding tube 3 weeks ago, and she is still with us. She's just sleeping. It shouldn't be long now. Anyway, it's a really difficult time for the family, so I was glad to connect with him yesterday. And then we moved on to more superficial topics, and he said, please apologize to Justin Trudeau and all Canadians for our Japanese Prime Minister. If you haven't been following Japanese politics, they recently got a new Prime Minister, Ishiba, and he is like a country uncle, a country bumpkin. I don't know anything about his biography, but he's crude and sloppy and kind of gross. And the video that I saw last week, which is not what Kenji's apology was about, was he was filmed eating an onigiri. An onigiri is a rice ball. It's one of my favorite snacks in Japan. You could buy them at any convenience store for like $1.50 or something, and two of them would be a nice lunch. Usually triangle shaped, although homemade or tend to be round, and stuffed with cooked salmon, cooked tuna, and stuff like that, and often covered in seaweed paper. Absolutely delicious. It's gross. I'll warn you, it's gross. So you can fast forward, but I think you'll be too curious to fast forward. It's only about like 20 seconds. This new prime minister, fairly new, it's been around for 4 months or 5 months. Just watch what he does with the onigiri. Are you still with me? Just disgusting. And I mean, if you know anything about Japanese culture, they're so polite, and manners and formality and looking your best and doing your best and not doing anything rude is intrinsic to their culture. And there's their prime minister behaving like that in public, standing around with a bunch of other politicians. Like, oh my God. So everybody in Japan is horrified by that. But what Kenji wanted to apologize to me for, and I haven't looked this up yet, I just talked to him yesterday, at the G20 meeting, all the meet and greets where you go from, the world leaders were coming just to say hello and shake his hand, and he didn't stand. He remained seated while the standing world leader, including Justin Trudeau, greeted him and shook his hand, and he just sat there and shook his hand. It's just he's just a ridiculous man. So Kenji wanted me to apologize to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the lack of decorum from this very decorous country, otherwise, usually. Without further ado, I've got another great mystery guest for you. So this week's mystery guest is a Canadian writer living in Berlin, Matthew Fox, and his debut novel and stories. This Is It came out in Canada in mid-October and has come out elsewhere in the last few days. Matthew Fox, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad to have a chance to talk to you. So this is a very gay novel, and it's told in stories. Tell us more.
Sure. So this novel is inspired by family stories. I come from a huge family. I'm one of like 32 of my generation. In my family, I've always been kind of obsessed with the stories that we tell over and over again. And to hear different people tell them, they have different agendas, they have different takes. And there's a real family epic in those stories. And I really wanted to find a way to take that idea and turn it into a single narrative but to still preserve the individual stories as they're told over and over again. So this is a novel. It's all fictionalized. There's some sort of broad strokes that apply to like my family's actual story, but I've had to largely fictionalize it. My goal was to really capture that idea of the stories being told over and over again through the family and so on. It is also a good way to write a family epic, like a multi-generational family epic where you can still be really, really intimate with the story that you're telling. So to tell each character's individual story and some small piece of their life that was a hinge moment, that was pivotal for them, was key for me. And sometimes when you read like a huge, sweeping family epic, 100 Years of Solitude, one of the big ones, those little things tend to get lost. And so like this was my way of trying to bring those stories to life, but also connect them in a way that was really meaningful and could add up to something at the end.
So tell us about your protagonist, Giovanni Zappacosta O'Hara.
Yes. So Giovanni is what I describe as a compelling coward. He is, yeah, he is an Italian Irish guy from a small town in Ontario. He is gay, and the story opens with he's living in Montreal. He has a long-term boyfriend who's suffering from cancer. Again, he's a coward, so he can't take it after a certain amount of time. Just the sheer amount of emotional and physical wear that it has on him. And he has long joked with his family that he's going to write this family epic and he's going to expose everybody for the villains that they are. And it's been a family joke for years, but he sort of seizes a moment where he can sort of get away from his situation. He's also kind of selfish. He seizes the moment to get away from his situation, says, oh, I have this aunt. She's going to pass away. She's quite old. And I really want to get her version of the stories. I want to get them down before she dies. So tells his boyfriend, who's sick, that he's going away for the weekend, and he travels to New York City to interview his aunt. But he doesn't come back. He finds an excuse to stay there. And yeah, that's how the story starts. And it tells you a lot about who Giovanni is at the beginning of the story. He's 24, he's scared, he's never had to deal with mortality like this before, even though he comes from this big family. And so that kicks off a lot of the themes of the book about death, about queer love, how we tell stories, because he's telling a story, he's lying to his boyfriend. So that's where we start. Giovanni narrates all of the stories. They're him collecting the stories. The maturity that he shows over the course of the book is one of my prime narrative engines here. Can he change from that initial person?
Yes, because I'm already heavily judging him for kind of ignoring his partner, his old boyfriend. So I'm imagining I will feel a bit differently or understand him a lot more by the end.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Tell us in rather broad strokes about the Zappacosta family that he's
Sure.
chronicling.
So that's his mother's family. Just like me, his mother's side of the family is Italian. They are from a small town in Abruzzo, and the provenance of their move to Canada is much storied in the family, and there's a lot of different versions of why and what motivated his grandfather to move from Italy to Canada in the 30s. Eventually, he gets to that story as well. But that action of the grandfather, the emigration from Italy to Canada, is what sets in motion a lot of the narrative plots of the Zappacosta family and sort of explains how his mother became who she is and how she passed on to him and his siblings the lessons that they've learned. And it helps explain why he has become the person that he is, at least at the beginning of the story. The Zappacostas are a huge family. Gio's mother has four sisters, so there's five of them total. That's not because his grandmother never had any boys. It's just that they were all born stillborn or miscarried or didn't last very long. Why was that? Why was it the boys that had to suffer such fates? Well, different people have different theories behind that, and that's all explored in the book. The family, I would say, is extremely close, extremely mouthy, extremely funny. He has so many aunts, and they act as sort of like a Greek chorus, or what I like to guy, an Italian chorus, who appear in different stories at different ages, and they have like a rat-a-tat-tat sort of rapport with one another that helps sort of narrate the cultural and religious and moral context of the story.
Well, I'm certainly already hooked on the teases that you've dangled in front of me about the family. You had a short story collection come out in 2005 called Cities of Weather.
Yes.
I might have a few more questions about that later. And now we have a novel in stories. So I think you've already explained a big part of why you chose to do a short story cycle or a novel in stories instead of a novel. But I
Mhm.
wonder if you have more to say about that.
It's funny. When you go to writing school, which is something that I did twice, you tend to write short stories as part of that program because if everybody was writing a novel, it becomes very difficult to do workshops around that novel. People can't read whole novels, although there are programs like that. My programs were more trying to get people to write in the moment. It wasn't about some big project that you were reviewing. I love short stories, and I've always loved short stories. And Mavis Gallant and Alice Munro and Laurie Moore, these are some of my favorite authors. And I hadn't really encountered a lot of short stories in the queer genre. And so it really well, David Ebershoff wrote one of my faves, Rose City. That's a great book. But yeah, it's not a format that you see a lot of out there in queer lit. And I really took to it. So my first book, which you've already referenced, it was almost entirely written while I was writing my MFA. So during that period, I was able to write a series of short stories. They're completely unrelated, but I was really honing the craft of my craft of writing a short story. When I got out of that program, I wrote a novel that wasn't very good, or apparently wasn't very good. It didn't get picked up anywhere. I tried my best. I wrote it for many, many years. You know, I'm not a rich man, so I've always had a job as well as doing my writing. So I tend to like produce things rather slowly, as you can tell by the huge gap between my first and my second published books. But I was still writing some other stuff on the side. I got things published in literary magazines and so on. And when I decided to put that novel in a drawer and start anew, it was when I moved to Berlin from Montreal. And I really threw myself into it. And I had this idea for these stories. Initially, they weren't as directly connected as in the final product, but it was only once my first reader sort of gave me some feedback that I really understood how they connected. And I was able to go back and revise the entire thing and turn it into a novel or what I would consider a novel. Now, that's not to say I'll never write a novel. The story format just happened to be what I wrote when I was in writing school, and then what suited this particular story that I wanted to tell. But my new thing that I'm writing now, it's a novel. So I have no desire to turn it into short stories, but they are really different beasts, and writing them is very different.
The title, This Is It. If it's not a spoiler to tell us more about why it's called This Is It.
It's not a spoiler at all. So one of the most memorable, funny animated characters in the book is Gio's mom. And I think that anybody who's lived in Ontario in the past 80 years will recognize Gio's mom as sort of a very confident, very memorable, very engaging kind of woman who's got a lot of sayings and got a lot of things that she repeats. This is it is one of them. I had a great aunt who used to say this is it all the time. I mean, I know everyone all over the world says it, and when you write a book called This Is It, you can't help but hear everybody say it all the time. But it was a real thing in my dad's side of the family, which was if you're having some big conversation and then you're coming around to the heart of the matter and somebody nails it, you say, "Oh, well, this is it." Right? So it's a way of saying, okay, we've come to the crux. We've come to the important thing that affects everything else. So it's not to give anything away to say that Gio's mom uses this term quite a bit. And then her kids, Gio and his sister and his brother, they make fun of her and always say, oh, well, this is it, in a like sarcastic way. And you get that right at the beginning. But it really was a way of crystallizing certain parts of the book where I could say, okay, this is it. This is the thing. I'm not going to give it away, but the thing that it turns out to be, I hope is quite surprising. Music is a big part of this book. And so I'm writing about something that happened in 2001. I was doing some research into the musical, sort of popularity at the time, like the landscape of the time, what would have been around. I had already decided on the name This Is It, or it was my working title because of the mom's speech patterns. And I was adding in this other layer of sort of cultural texture to the book. And I was like, what was going on at that time? What would Gio have been listening to? And I did a bit of research, and almost instantly, one of the first things that came up was that the Strokes had a huge hit with Is This It?
Is this it?
Yeah, and I remember that so clearly. Like that album of the Strokes was huge for me. I listened to it all the time, and that was the year that I moved to New York City to go to grad school. And I was able to work it into the first story, which is partially set in New York City, and that is why the first story is called "Is This It?"
Tell us about this beautiful. I don't know what it is. It's not a butterfly, but it's some kind of an insect with wings.
Yeah,
So tell us why it's on the cover or what it has to do with the
sure.
story.
So it is, if you can see it, it's a dragonfly.
Dragonfly.
And one of the things I noticed that I was doing, and this happens when you're writing, is after your first draft, that there are things that are connecting that you weren't conscious of, and they're just in the book. I noticed that basically in all of my stories, there was some insect that was prominent in the story. I started to think about that and why I was doing that, and what was it about insects that I sort of subconsciously found so connected to the story. And I'm not going to give that part away because it's very subtle in the book. But one of the insects is the dragonfly. And the dragonfly is the tattoo that Gio's boyfriend has on his chest.
Oh,
And so when we meet, his name is BF, Brian. So when we see BF throughout the tales, you learn about the tattoo.
can't wait to read it and see if you will come back and we can have a deeper dive chat
I'd
about
love
it.
to.
Yeah. One of your Canadian launches is in Montreal in early December with
It's
Christopher.
towards the end of December, actually. It's on the
End of
19th.
December.
Yeah, it's on the
Okay.
19th at Notre Dame des Quais, 7 o'clock, if anybody wants to
Um,
come.
and that's Montreal, and that's with, I believe, you're being interviewed or a conversation with Christopher Dorado, who is definitely a friend of this channel. He's been on my channel twice. Yeah. So, in fact, he's the
Love
one. It
Chris.
was his blurb that brought this book to my attention. So,
Oh, great. I'm glad blurbs work.
yes, that one sure did. You've mentioned some of my favorite short story writers, Mavis Gallant and Alice Munro. For years, I've
Mhm.
always said it depends what kind of day I'm having, whether I would say that Alice's stories are better than Mavis's, but it's a different answer every day. But they're my
Hard to
two
say.
favorite story writers. I'm still coming to terms with the revelations about Alice Munro, but that's a conversation for another day. But
I think we all are. Yeah.
yes, yes. You have some books to recommend. I wonder if you've got some short story collections in there. I'm going to take a wild guess that you do.
Well, I picked gay themed books, obviously. And one of the ones I really wanted to recommend was a short story collection that I've already referenced is David Ebershoff's The Rose City.
And I didn't
If you
know about his short story collection. I only know about what's his novel that everybody's been
The
talking about?
Danish Girl.
The Danish Girl. Yeah.
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 So obviously he's famous for the Danish Girl, but he did have quite a career before that. And I remember someone recommending The Rose City to me when I was in grad school. I read it then, and then I reread it a couple of years ago, and I reviewed it on my Instagram channel. And it's just such a fabulous, tight book of stories. Each story really, I think any gay man over the age of 35 will really identify with that moment that he's trying to capture, sort of transitioning into midlife, and understanding that the people around you that you've known for your whole lives, the straight ones are like going to have kids, they're getting married, and so on. And that's common enough for gay men, but it's different. Certainly in the 90s when he was writing it, it was very different. There wouldn't be very many gay men in their 30s who would not see themselves in these stories. It's 9 stories, it's a quick read. It's got a lot of like surprising moments, which is what I look for in literature, those moments that are utterly surprising but totally inevitable. I really wanted to mention, and I've been sort of talking about this book quite a bit, was R.M. Vaughan's Pervatory.
Is that the one that came out posthumously?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Good. I don't
So,
know much about it, so I'm eager to hear more about it.
did you know Richard's work, or did you know Richard at all?
Just knew of him, but didn't
Okay.
know his. I haven't read his work.
Well, one did not soon forget meeting Richard Vaughan. He was a friend of mine. I knew him for many years, and every time I saw him, he he sort of shakes you free of anything you might have been thinking. He had a very different perspective on the world and could always show you something new. And he was a great writer. He was a great art critic. He was a maximalist. He had no patience for dainty, safe, and dare I say, Canadian
I
sensibilities.
love that.
Yeah, so he was a bit of a rebel. He was a total pansy, his words, a radical gay man who really had a way of looking at art and a way of looking at humans that was entirely his own. And I knew Richard particularly towards the end of his life because he had moved to Berlin. He wanted to get away from sort of from Canada. And I didn't know while he was here that he was writing a book about Berlin. He really taps in, it's a very short book, but he really taps into what Berlin is like for a gay man, why a lot of people move here, why the city has its libertine reputation, what can happen to you in a town where there's no last call and there's always a sex room open and there's always a place for you to go. There's a gay bar, around the corner, every corner. And in a weird haunted town like Berlin, full of like bizarre historical scars where the 20th century just happened to this city. He really captured what it was like to be here, and particularly as a gay man from Canada, just like he was, it really resonated with me. He's got some nasty things to say about Canadian sensibilities, but they're always very interesting to read, whether you agree with them or not. He definitely captured, why a lot of gay men sort of move here, and particularly why they move here in their like 30s or 40s. He calls it the resignation years, and that Berlin is the perfect city for that. I just devoured that book.
And it's a memoir.
No, it's a novel.
It's a novel. Okay. Purgatory, wonderful title. Well,
Yeah.
that's going on my list. And did you have another one?
I always have books to recommend. A book that is a memoir that I had heard about here and there and finally picked up to read was Ben Benderson's The Romanian. This is a book about sort of an older Jewish man from upstate New York who is gay and in the 90s spent a lot of time on assignment in Europe and around the world, but mostly in Europe. And he had a taste for hustlers and he would just fall in love with these boys that he would rent. And this memoir is very specifically about one that he falls in love with and the degree of delusion and of arrangement and of cost that he goes through to set up a life for them. And it's about obsession, the nature of desire, how temporal it can be, why it is that we find people attractive, why do we have the sexual desires that we have. And I gotta say, it manages to weave together this love story of him and this rent boy, as well as the history of Romania. So he becomes obsessed with Romania because he's in love with this Romanian boy, as well as his life as a journalist and as a writer, and his relationship with his mother. That's sort of like the American part of the book. The way that he weaves together everything at the end really blew me away. It's just all about what motivates us and what is the nature of work. And there's like a large part of it that's about him doing a translation of all people, Celine Dion's autobiography that he's working on through the book. So there's his work and there's the sex workers' work. And then there's this history of Romania that also involves royal history of Romania as it was fading away and was slowly being taken over by the fascists, by the Nazis. What did they have to do? And the way that it all comes together at the end is really remarkable. It's one of the best memoirs I think I've ever read.
Wow. The name has kind of been floating in the back of my mind when I think about gay writers, but I've never heard as much about him as you've just told me. So
Same. Yeah, I never picked up one of his books until this one. And yeah, he's a great writer, maybe a few too many adjectives, but I can forgive that. The story really drives forward. Great book.
Matthew, this has been a wonderful conversation. I hope you'll come back.
I will. I hope you enjoy the book. Hit me up when you are ready to talk about it.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for being so generous with your time.
My pleasure.
So, yes, as I always say, because it's always true, I'm really excited to dive into This Is It and hopefully have Matthew back. All right, I've been a little busy on BookTube. The first one that I posted was a standalone 7-minute chat with the gay Scottish novelist Alan Radcliffe. He was my mystery guest months ago, and his third pick for his book recommendations was Elizabeth Strout, and he waxed eloquently and at some length about all of her novels that he'd read, and I just didn't have the space for it in that Friday read, so I told him at the time, I'm not going to include it, but I will publish it later as a standalone, and so that was now up. He provides a wonderful introduction to Elizabeth Strout, and so for the first time in my life, I've decided I am going to try her. So check that out. Like I say, it's only 7 minutes long. And then a couple days ago, my subscriber and patron, Robin, and I had a pseudo-buddy read about Less Than Angels, a Barbara Pym novel from, I believe, 1955. And we had that chat months ago, and I've finally gotten it edited and posted, and it's a great chat about a great book, so you can check that out as well, if you are so moved. I finished 3 books, but one of them is I'm going to keep a mystery for the time being. Stay tuned. So I'll tell you about 2 books that I finished, and I haven't started anything new recently. I finished, at long last, I started it months ago, but then it just collected dust because of all my other commitments, not because I wasn't enjoying it, and I sank into it and finished it off this week. Birding by Rose Ruane. She is a writer from Glasgow, and she was probably one of my most popular mystery guests. For as many wonderful guests as I've had, people had a real reaction to her appearance. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. This is her second novel. It came out in 2024. It's set in a seaside resort town, not necessarily Scotland, but in the UK somewhere. It's run down, but slowly gentrifying, so it has a mixture of atmospheres in the town. But the 2 main characters, 2 women that don't know each other, are really down on their luck. Lydia was a famous pop star for approximately 10 minutes in the 90s, and her life has kind of gone to pot since then. This is set in contemporary times, just after the Me Too movement, so very contemporary. And she hasn't really made much of herself, found any fulfillment since that 10 minutes of fame. And she is battling incredible insecurities and codependency stuff. She's just got a lot of psychological and social, never mind misogyny and all that stuff to deal with. But she's really struggling. And the other one is Joyce, and she's about the same age, maybe 40s. She's never married, and she's lived with her divorced mother and lived under her mother's thumb since the father and husband of the family walked out 30 years ago, I don't know how many, long time ago. And they've been quite poor, and they have become the local eccentrics of the town. They dress the same, they collect little dolls, and the mother controls everything the daughter does. So Joyce has never been allowed to find a boyfriend or go out even by herself, really at all, and is just completely controlled by this domineering, absolutely. She is very mentally disturbed, absolutely, unbelievably so, the mother. And it's so the daughter, Joyce, is got her own mental health challenges because she's living such an unfulfilled, barren existence. And the two storylines do connect later in the novel, and I'm certainly not going to tell you how, but in the most intriguing way. And both women find a sense of self and a sense of validation and a sense of hope for the future, so that it's not all bleak, but it's a very bleak story. I enjoyed it very much. Just lovely, lusciously well written, and delves into things to do with the Me Too movement and consent and personal responsibility and all that, with just such a nuanced look at women's sexuality, women's sexual choices, and women's sexual victimization in ways that really were enlightening for me. I recommend it very highly. There was a bit too much psychological self-analysis in, I would say, one of the characters' parts of the story for my taste, but that was okay. I think that this book would hit a reader just right if they were struggling with similar issues, because there's a lot of wisdom in it, and I loved it in a 5-star way, despite, like I say, just a little bit too much psychological self-analysis. And I'll let you discover for yourself why it's named Birding, but that was a wonderful aspect. This book is in quite deep conversation with one of my top reads from last year, Small Joys by Elvin James Mensah, and I hope those two find each other's novels, because they really make an excellent pairing. So if you liked Small Joys, I think you would very much like Birding. And that's all I'll say about that for now, he says mysteriously. The other one that I have finished is this biography of the daughters of Queen Victoria, aptly titled Victoria's Daughters by Jerrold M. Packard. I'm not going to talk about this too long, because I said, the last time I said I'm not going to talk about it too long because I know none of you are interested, and I got at least one comment saying, I beg your pardon, I'm very interested. So I'll talk about it for a few minutes, but I gave it 4 stars because the biographer, however competent, was a sexist peg in the way that he was a misogynist, really. So he wrote very sarcastically and uncharitably about these women. I thought did them a disservice, yet still managed to create a fascinating portrait of them, their lives, their relationships, their social causes, children and grandchildren and all that. So I found it absolutely riveting, and part of what riveted me to it was I got so angry in places at the author. Every book I read about Queen Victoria, and I mean she was very much a character in this because it was about her daughters, but every single book gives me almost a completely different impression of her than the book I read the last time. She's very much portrayed as a domineering, controlling mother, and I think to a certain degree she was. She didn't want her youngest daughter Beatrice to ever marry and to be her private secretary and helpmate. That is true. But I did question like I say, there's just a sarcastic, really judgmental tone that didn't need to be there, and I still would have appreciated the fact that, yes, Queen Victoria did try to control her children, and the degree to which they resisted that. But, these were fascinating women. Oh, my God. Let's see. Who do I want to tell you about? Louise. Louise was an artist. She was a sculptor. I'll put it up on the screen. Her statue of Queen Victoria is in front of some famous palace or something in London, and she was a really, really gifted artist. She had very modern ideas for her time, and she did not get along with her mother very well at all, and her mother allowed her to go to art school, but that was a huge thing in those days, and the Queen was very reluctant to allow it, but did allow her to attend art school in the, what would it have been, the 1870s or 80s or something. She is also very important to Canada's place names. That's where we get the name Lake Louise, it's named after her, and also the province of Alberta is named after her, but I guess ultimately named after Prince Albert. One of Princess Louise's many middle names was Alberta, named after her father, who died very young. She was absolutely fascinating. She and her husband, she married us. She was also the first member of the British royal family in hundreds of years to marry into a noble family rather than another royal family. She married a Scottish duke, or duke in waiting, I guess. He was not the duke yet. He was appointed the Governor General of Canada in the 1878. She and her husband started. He was the Governor General, and so that's why there's so many place names named after her. And they didn't have perhaps the happiest of marriages, or perhaps the most sexual. They didn't have any kids. I think she was the only child of Queen Victoria that did not have children. And maybe it was because her husband was gay, but I thought that part of this biography was a little bit sketchy. There was no real proof about, he made a lot of claims about how unhappy she was and that he might have been gay without any real evidence. But what he does describe that was fascinating, and I didn't know, is that they were in a sled accident. Was it New Year's Eve? A sleigh accident on Valentine's Day, 1880. And she was very severely injured, but they didn't want the media, to know how badly injured she was. Like, she wasn't in danger of dying, but she was badly hurt. She had problems with her bones, with aches and pains, serious problems with her back and so on for the rest of her life. But because they didn't let on how badly injured she was, the press and the Canadian people kind of turned against her because she stopped appearing in public, and she went back to England for about a year and a half, and then finally came back to Canada, and blah, 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 all that stuff. But I just found her absolutely fascinating. I actually have a biography just about Princess Louise, which I'm hoping to buddy read. This was a buddy read, by the way, with my royalty buddy reader, Leah, in Calgary, and I'm hoping to buddy read that with her. That's what I've got to say this week. Thanks for watching.